We're live. Welcome, everyone. Very excited to be here. Let's let people kind of roll in and join us wherever you're joining us, whether it's on LinkedIn or YouTube. Very excited to have you join us. If you want to turn on closed captioning wherever you are, sometimes it's auto-generated, but if it's not, you can go to the settings on whatever platform you're on, usually the three little dots underneath the screen, and turn on closed captioning for your viewing pleasure. I just want to make sure that everyone can kind of see that and do that. So, great. Very excited to be here. Before we jump into things, before we introduce our guest speaker, I want to do a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions or comments or anything, whatever platform you're on, add them into the comments. We'll be able to see them. We'll be able to answer. We've got Connor on the Gusto team, also monitoring chat. So if you need any help with anything, he's there to help you out. Connor, why don't you say hello to everybody in LinkedIn and YouTube? So just, let us know. We're here to help you make sure you have a great viewing experience and, get all the information and content that you kind of signed up for. So without further ado, I'm really excited to have this conversation. As we're leading up to Pride Month, we all know what can happen. We see a lot of rainbow logos coming out. We see a lot of rainbow flags coming out. We see a lot of talk from a lot of corporations. But how do you go beyond what has been dubbed the rainbow washing? And so I'm really excited to be talking to Sarah today about how we can support 2SLGBTQ plus employees in our workplaces. And so I'm going to pass it over to Sarah to do a little introduction and tell us a little bit more about themselves.
Hi, thanks so much, Noah. Thank you, Gusto and Connor and everybody for hosting this awesome opportunity to talk. It's almost Pride Month, so woohoo! Almost time to celebrate, and yeah, we're very excited here at QueerTech. My name is Sarah. I'm the partnerships manager for QueerTech. So we're a Canadian-based non-for-profit, and we work to support the diversity and inclusion efforts being done in companies across North America. And we help support companies clear the ecosystem. So very excited for the opportunity today to discuss about how we can, continue to change what needs changing.
Awesome. Great. Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. And if you haven't heard of QueerTech and you don't, haven't checked out their site and their resources, I highly recommend checking them out, seeing what they're up to. There's a lot there to help people like me, people in HR, make our workplaces a little bit better. So before we kind of jump into, the meat of the conversation of how, people can actually make workplaces better, I wanted to define a couple things. And so the first one is I want to define what allyship actually means, because I know there's a lot of I'm going to say a continuum of what allyship looks like. And so I wanted to get your perspective on this, Sarah, of what is allyship? How can, HR practitioners such as myself really show up as an ally for the 2S LGBTQ plus community?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I love your, wish to define things at the beginning. So an ally is really someone who is taking an action in supporting the community. So this can be through various different ways. So one of the ways it could be to kind of get educated and really understand what are the unique challenges that the LGBTQ plus community is facing. What are the people's experiences? Then from basic stuff like what do all the letters mean, and then understanding also how to kind of go beyond the educating yourself, how to take action, for example, in the workplace or in a professional setting. For example, when it comes to pronouns, making sure that you say your pronouns at the beginning, or things like that really show to us LGBTQ plus people in the room or outside the room that it's okay that they're there, that everybody belongs, right?
I love it. I love it. It's going beyond that listening and learning stage, which is very important because we can't really do anything if we don't really listen to people and listen to the communities that we're actually trying to support and learning more. But going beyond that, and I think that's the hardest step for a lot of people, is it's easy to listen, it's easy to learn, it's easier to figure out what we can do. It's that next step of actually doing something that's the most difficult, because often we're so afraid we're going to make the misstep. But let's kind of talk about specifically the unique challenges that members of the 2SLGBTQ plus community face in the workplace, because it is unique. And I know that, the community is so very broad and there's a lot of intersectionality in there, but let's talk about some of those broad challenges that the community does face.
Yeah, of course. So, as a queer tech, we do a lot of impact work, right? So for us, it's really important to kind of have the data to be able to measure that impact. We're conducting a research with University of Concordia and University of Montreal, and we can share today some of our key initial findings with you about what are some of the key challenges that the queer workers are facing. And of course, the big ones are discrimination and harassment, right, at the workplace. This is something that's faced by queer people across industries. So that's obviously always a big topic that I'm sure we've had the experience with already. And then it's important to know that workplace discrimination is something that is more likely among women, among people with disabilities, and among Indigenous people. And then also that we found that many organizations actually lack explicit gender identity and gender expression policies. That some organizations also lack research-backed tools to assist workers in transition journeys, and also adequate health coverage for gender-affirming procedures. And a little bit about what we found as it relates to sort of the health conditions related to the workplace. So queer Canadians are actually more likely than non-queer Canadians to live with chronic health conditions or physical disabilities, and they're also more likely to they're likely to report lower levels of general and mental health, and higher levels of stress and food insecurity. And then finally, two-spirit and transgender individuals are more likely to be denied employment and to experience harassment. So, based on all these, all these key findings that I've just listed, I think it's important to kind of just be aware of these things. That when kind of figuring out, trying to understand how to support the community within your company, because being aware of these and keeping them in mind when creating policies, when creating work plans for the year, when trying to understand how to better support the community is really important to really make sure that you're addressing some of the things that some of the things that you can create impact in already.
I want to double take on a couple of things that you talked about, and I think like there's a lot there just in that in all the research that you, and I think we could spend hours just talking through all of that. But I think
I wanted to give you everything at once. So now that we have a lot of stuff to unpack together.
Perfect. Love it. Yeah. And I know there is a lot to unpack there, and so I think a lot of people who are joining us today, it's you hear all of that and you're like, oh my god, oh my goodness, where do I start? And so like I think you touched on one thing of like let's like a simple place to start is policy. So having gender affirming gender language policy. And so let's start there. Let's start on something that every HR practitioner understands policy pretty well. We're all very good at writing them. So what is something like give us an example of like what would be like a gender affirming or gender language policy that you would want to see in an organization? We don't have to go into the details, but like high level, what should something like that cover, protect, do for the kind of queer employees that will be there in that workplace?
Yeah, I'll give you two. So for example, one of the things you can already see at this webinar, so you have pronouns next to your name. So that signifies that, for everybody who doesn't have like the regular cis pronouns to their name, to their identity, it's okay to say them, right? It's okay to exist, right? So that's one thing. So encouraging kind of colleagues and the team, especially the management, as well, to like display pronouns next to the email address in the signature, or in any kind of group work setting. That would be one thing. And the second thing I would say that is like kind of really, the bread and butter, would be to kind of amend the gender binary on the forms. So, for example, when let's say applying for a position at your company, does the person have to say, what's my gender or sex? Does it say male or female only? Are there other options? And so, kind of thinking about those things to really create an environment where people from our communities actually feel like this job posting or this opportunity is for them as well.
I like that. It's allowing people to self-identify in the way that they're most comfortable with, and not being put into those little boxes. I know, like we have an insurance benefits provider, and unfortunately, insurance is a bit of a slower moving beast in a lot of ways. So, when we looked at our benefits providers, we're like, when people are filling out their medical forms, are they able to pick more than just the binary gender? And some of them say yes, and some of them say no. Some of them, at least when they say no, they say, we ask gender at birth and not current gender identity. But it is something to consider. Just like when you're talking to benefits providers, that's a very simple thing. Can my team choose something that's not the binary? And making sure that, we got to look out not just within our own teams, but within the, different tools and in vendors that we also work with that are going to be connecting to our team.
Exactly.
Cool.
Another thing that's really cool is to kind of institute trainings. Obviously, like trainings are a big way to promote both like education and also a culture where these things are talked about and okay.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of awareness training, of helping people understand where people are coming from. I think it's really important to understand the history of different groups and communities, and sort of why they are in the positions that they're in, or they lack the sort of agency to really advocate for themselves in the same way as other groups. I think it's really important to understand that historical background.
Exactly. Yeah. I wanted to add something about the history, if that's okay now.
For sure. Yeah. Let's
Awesome.
do as much as we can. You're running the show here. I'm just asking the questions.
All right. Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So I just wanted to add, because it is Pride Month coming up, and I wanted to kind of like last couple of days I've been reflecting about like why is it Pride, right? And I think it's important to kind of go back to the basics when especially around this time when June is coming, and I think why we celebrate Pride, and why is it that word, why is it that emotion, and when you think about it, it's really about the fact that the pride itself is a reaction to another emotion. It's to its contrasting emotion, which is actually shame, right? So pride is a response to shame, and then shame really comes from the fact that at the core of shame is a statement, I am wrong. So like when we do something wrong, then it's guilt. I've done something wrong. But shame is really about something that you can't change, that is, I am wrong. And this is what happens because for example, like people who are adults right now who are queer, from the queer community, they likely have grown up in communities where there wasn't a lot of representation of 2SLGBTQ plus people around them, right? So what happens in that situation is that there's no people around you, so you start thinking, wait, well, the experience that I'm having, I'm not seeing anyone who's having the same experience as I am, so that does that mean that my environment is wrong? No, it's much safer to think actually I'm wrong. So that's where shame is coming from actually historically lack of representation. And these things are changing right now. And I think it's very exciting and it's very big what's happening right now, that we're changing these things. And Pride is really about responding to those feelings and responding to that history and actually healing and changing the environment and increasing representation so that generations down the line don't have to deal with these feelings.
It's really neat. I've thank you for sharing that. First off, I haven't really heard that perspective of that it is that response to that shame, because that's you can see what's happening in the U.S. right now. There's this big backlash against specifically the trans community and drag brunches and all these things. Like there's this huge backlash that's coming out from there was a bit of a more general acceptance of things, and now there's this huge backlash against things, and that denial of existence, which does, like you say, cause a lot of shame when you have an experience and the community around you is saying that existence is wrong. Then you can internalize a lot of that shame, and Pride is the month to take that back and say, no, I will not feel shame. I will feel pride in who I am and what I feel and who I love, which I think is a really special way to think about it. So thank you for sharing that.
Noah gets it.
I'm trying. Every day we're just trying a little bit harder here and doing a little bit more. And so, like, as we lead into Pride Month, we see a lot of rainbow washing. We see a lot of corporations make a lot of grand statements and do a lot of things throughout the month, but that doesn't really translate to the rest of the year. And so I would love to hear your perspective on how, as an organization, you can kind of position your work in an authentic manner, that you're actually trying to do this. Because I'm sure, and justifiably so, the Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus community has been burned many, many times by corporations and communities and organizations saying they're allies and supportive, but when push comes to shove, not actually doing anything. Because it's really easy to do it during June. It's really easy to do it in Pride Month because everyone else is doing it. But how do we? I'll include myself in this conversation. How do we show that we're actually authentic in the work that we want to do, and that we actually want to support the community and really try and elevate it within our organizations and by proxy the communities with which we work in?
Yeah, I mean, I love this question, and thank you so much. It's definitely a thing, a rainbow washing. But I kind of like to. I'm optimistic in a way that I think that there's that thing of like fake it till you make it. So I feel like it's improving. But I think it's important to address what you're talking about, essentially, that how do we, because queer people are queer all year round, right? Like it's not just June. So we like to say that, we like to joke about this all the time. But it's really about like how can you make sure that you're thinking about these things, that you're thinking about diversity and inclusion all year round. And that's really something that, from an individual level to the organizational level, it has to it requires an investment of energy and attention to this so that it really becomes reality. We all know, the HR community and people who do diversity and inclusion. This is the kind of work that takes a lot more than 1 month or a one-off event thing to kind of make happen. So just kind of being holding yourself accountable to the goals and principles that set for yourself is the challenge, right? And one thing that really comes to mind is that a way to do this is to partner with local organizations who can really kind of provide support and work with you together to drive a strategy that takes a little bit more than 1 month, right? That's like 3 to 4 months or 12 months period where some of this work can be really start to pay off and start to have impact.
I like that. I think like really focusing on that long game. I think so often we want the quick fix. We want the like the one and done. I did my thing and then I can move on. But DEI, inclusion, belonging, that's a forever thing. Like it's like you never stop doing it. And I think that again, because of that enormity of the task, a lot of people are afraid of just like, where do I start? And I think we touched on a couple of things earlier, like policies, pronouns, benefits. Like these are simple spots to start and just start thinking about that. And I think like gender affirming care, like does your benefits provider provide gender affirming care? Is that something members of your organization can take advantage of? And if not, what would be the cost to adding that into a benefits package? It's probably pretty small, because it's not like the whole organization is going to go out and do it right away. It's like it's one thing. It's maybe 10% of the population of your organization will actually utilize it, and even then, some of them might not, because they're not ready to kind of come out within their organization.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's not that moment. And to your larger point about D&I, I really think that like one of the most exciting things for me is that D&I makes, like, the long game makes so much business sense. It's just about, when you think about how many how like how much you can unlock by making people feel like they belong, by making people feel like this is their team. You unlock so much potential, so much energy that really translates into results at work. And this is one of the most exciting things about D&I, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that, because like you and I, in preparation for this call, talked a little bit about masking, and that lots of people who are queer, 2SLGBTQ plus, they mask at work. They're not who they truly are. And we talked a little bit about like there's a finite amount of energy everyone has in a day. It's like time. You don't have infinite amount of energy. You don't have infinite amount of time. And so if you're spending 40% of your energy throughout the day just making sure your mask doesn't come off, that's 40% of your energy that you can't put towards work or life. And so, like you said, if we can create organizations that are safe, do cultivate a culture of belonging, then that mask can come off a bit more. Maybe not fully, but at least it's not 40%. Maybe it becomes 20% or 10%. And like you said, that just unlocks a vast amount of energy that people can actually focus on their career, because everyone wants to be successful in their career. That's, I think, a universal that we can all agree upon, no matter who we are or what our beliefs or orientations are. I think that's one thing that we can all want, is success in our careers. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And I think it's worth calling out of this potential. And there's the conversation of like, there's the business case for DEI. If you have more diverse teams, all the data shows that your revenue is better, your products are more resilient, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that conversation is also missing that energy piece that's unlocked a little bit. And I think we also just have a moral obligation to do these types of things if we want to progress things forward.
No, I really like how you think about it. I think it's really good, and I think while they were talking, it made me think about one of the most elegant ways to make this happen in your organization is really to encourage management to kind of provide these provide representation, and really to be to embody inclusion, right? And so and another would be also to kind of encourage sponsorship for between queer colleagues. So in a way that that 2SLGBTQ plus individuals have opportunities to connect with the sponsor from the community, from the allied community, for that they can kind of really support them in their career. And that's really kind of multiplying success for that one individual, but also multiplying representation especially in the higher management level.
I like that. I like that you talked about that piece of sponsorship, because it's so important. Of like, it's. I think mentorship gets a lot of airtime. We all talk about how important it is to mentor folks from marginalized communities, people from the 2SLGBTQ plus community, Black employees, etc., Indigenous employees. But mentorship only takes someone so far. Like, for allies to be truly impactful is putting your name behind somebody when they do that promotion, when they go apply for that promotion, or even encouraging them to go apply for that promotion, and then going on the other side and being like, this person has done all the work, they deserve the chance, et cetera, et cetera. Really putting yourself out there and spending some of your own social capital to get individuals into those positions, I think is really, really important as well. And designing the programs for that to happen. I love it. Let's keep moving. I got another question for you. And I think, the title of this talk is, challenges and barriers. So challenges and barriers. And so how can HR people like myself, because I think that's the majority of people who are joining us today, design programs for the queer community to reduce those barriers? What are the things that we should be thinking about? And this doesn't even have to be policy specifically to help members of the 2SLGBTQ community, but it could really be like a vacation policy, your sick leave policy, like policies in general. What are some things that we should be thinking about when designing these policies that we might not catch if we weren't thinking about them?
Yeah, excellent. So, I mean, we do have a couple minutes to address that, but we have a report coming up in the fall, so make sure to watch this space for kind of white papers on this topic. But I would say, like, the way that would be like interesting to think about it is to really of course, address the HR policies, which is the main thing, but also kind of address a more broader institutional policies as well. So kind of making sure that as an organization you're partnering up with a 2SLGBTQ plus affiliates or community organizations, and then creating products and support within. Within the ecosystem of where you're at, and then also kind of thinking more on the people side, like making sure that there's adaptations in the actions of colleagues, so that's a little bit what we addressed already, but kind of what is a supportive coworker? What is the ideal supportive coworker, right? And then what is the ideal supportive management? Right, like what are some of the and don't underestimate engaging with your community at work, and encouraging encouraging formal or informal organizing of the community at work, because these are some of the people, of course, like I'm not saying go and talk to all the gay people in your company. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying invest in some of those relationships where it feels natural and feels okay, to kind of have a one-on-one and just understand and listen and like what are the needs, what are the what are the things that are happening that are current for you, and then just go from there. And then of course one other would be to kind of address the policies related to accountability and transparency. So kind of using some of the, providing, clear paths to progression, for example, depending on the size of the company, and paths to mobility within the organization, stuff like that.
I love it. And I think like you touched on something there, which is like clearly defining how people can grow with an organization and taking the ambiguity out of things. I think that's where a lot of marginalized communities really get lost, is that they don't have maybe that mentor or that advocate at a higher level who can kind of help guide them along the path. But if everything's laid out for everyone to see, kind of levels the playing field a little bit of just like, here's how you get to the next level. And if you do these things, obviously there's still extra barriers involved because you still have a manager and all those things, but it helps level the playing field a little bit at least.
Absolutely, and that really kind of takes out the mental load of that. And then when you think about like the mental health and the mental load that's already there, then this is why you don't have people from the marginalized communities going up, because the load is just too heavy, right? So kind of thinking about this stuff and intersectionality, and kind of really understanding that some of these communities, like this is where you need to focus and double down on the support to kind of really level the playing field.
Comes back to that energy that we were just talking about a little bit earlier, like those from marginalized communities, the queer community, like you said, the mental load that they're already carrying just from having to live in a society and in many of these communities that deems them unnecessary is immense. And so if you can help alleviate that even a little bit, it provides extra space for people to actually focus on their career and actually try and get ahead and do the job that they were hired to do. And so I think we underestimate the power of just providing clarity for people and how that really can empower them to make their own decisions. So that's just a little kind of a click in my brain right now too, of just like, oh yeah, that is very helpful. Just giving people more transparency into how they can grow as individuals is great. I want to touch on one thing. Every sort of marginalized community out there, the 2SLGBTQ plus community is not homogenized in any way, shape, or form. There's a lot of intersectionality there, with many varying different degrees of experience and privilege that comes within that community. And so I'd love to hear your perspectives on, I think often, I'm going to say especially in tech, because that's where I work and that's where a lot of my experience is in, is we take a DEI focus and we tend to just glom on to one group and kind of ignore the rest. What is your advice to make sure that that doesn't happen? That when you are designing programs, and this can be specific to the queer community, but you're still taking that intersectionality into account and making sure that, it is an equitable program for everyone who is part of that community.
Yeah, this is a great question. So the short answer is make sure that you're always thinking about intersectionality when designing any programs for marginalized communities. And why that's important is I'm going to try and kind of help you in that process today by kind of explaining how I see, like how I visualize intersectionality. It's really, just to define it first, like intersectionality is when there's a couple of identities that are intersecting that are marginalized. So they kind of, it's like a double whammy. All right. But what, some of the research that I've looked at over the years is that it's really showing that actually intersectional identities compound in their results. So what happens is that, let's say if I'm a woman, or I was born a woman and I'm also trans, then like as a woman I have like a -1, and then as trans I have a -1 as well, and then that actually ends up not being -2 but actually -3, right? Because it's like a double thing, right? And so just kind of really always thinking about being aware of that like this program is for this specific marginalized community, but members of this community are also going to be like impacted in a compound way. So like let me stay aware of that and just double down on my support where it's needed. Right?
I think that's interesting. I've definitely thought about it in the sense of like, like you're a Black queer woman, like you've got three strikes against you in society right now. But it's not just three strikes, like you said, it's actually compounded and becomes like 5 or 6 strikes.
Mm.
That weight is that much more heavy. And making space for that in the programs and the supports that you're kind of designing and building, that, it's not, it might be enough for one person, but maybe it's not quite enough for another person who has a different experience or comes from, has that extra, I want to say, burden of that society has placed on them. So I think that's a great insight that I hope a lot of our members are coming away from watching this webinar. And so there is always we talked a little bit about the business case of the initiatives and supporting the queer community, but what other strategies have you seen, or what other strategies does queer tech specifically employ to get the buy-in of executives? And I don't just mean the buy-in of like them saying, yeah, sure, go and do that and go away and stop bothering me with this, but actually getting involved, because that's, we're an HR tech platform. We very much see the difference between our clients of those who have executive involvement and those who don't. The ones that have an executive involvement are way more successful than those that don't. And so from, this perspective, what advice do you give groups? What advice do you give people like myself, or really like any people manager, to try and get that upper leadership, that executive team on board and involved? What's your strategy here?
Yeah, this is thanks so much for this question. This is hugely important, because it's really, sometimes like, providing support and doing the D&I work is just, like absolutely correlated with how much how well you can obtain the buy-in of someone who has the budget, right? So so this is hugely important. And the way that we kind of structured it at Queer Tech is that we really look at when we start working with a company, we work with 3 different stakeholders within the company. So we work with the HR team, and then we work with the D&I committee, or D&I lead or champion. And then we also work with the ERG, or the the informal or formal pride group at the company. Because the more that we can the more people that we can get involved in attending our events, in attending the networking meetups, in profiting from the online trainings that we provide each quarter, and a lot of the resources that we have on our website, and online content, the more people kind of just feel like this is important and feel like this is real, right, in their experience. And the more that is, the more the easier it gets to kind of really talk to the right person and obtain that buy-in.
So really taking that, like, I'm going to say, splatter approach of like, it's really about getting every stakeholder involved, and kind of like the more it's happening, the more people are aware of it, the more they'll also start to do it more and more. What's your sort of advice or strategy to HR leaders or people leaders, or even like individual employees, to kind of like maybe have that conversation where they need somebody at a higher level to increase their self-awareness? And so like sometimes it's just ignorance, right? Ignorance is bliss. It's really easy to be ignorant, but it's bliss for the ignorant person, but it's terrible and detrimental for everyone else. So how do you coach people to have those conversations with people who, and I'm not necessarily for like a member of the queer community, but even like a cisgendered person like myself, or like an IC, how do they have those conversations with people who hold more institutional power than them, to really convey to them that they need to be more self-aware?
Yeah. So one of the ways is to really kind of one of the ways that I employ is just to kind of ask questions. So, and to kind of I mean, in general, over the course of the years of being queer, I've become very an expert in kind of meeting people where they're at. And I think that that's important if you're really kind of looking to make progress, however incremental it is. That just kind of figuring out where the person is, and then asking them the question that will give them an opportunity to make that step further, right? And then the second, because you mentioned a person who has more institutional power within your environment. I mean, uh, you know, talking about the business case for, again, coming back to it, for diversity and inclusion is it's important. I mean, like this is a right now we're in a historical moment, and things are happening, things are changing very quickly, and I feel like everybody needs compassion. Everybody needs to take a lot of little steps forward, right? And I feel like we're all doing it, and just seek support horizontally and seek advice horizontally, and then vertically, just keep doing it for everybody, and at some point it will just start it will start going so easy.
I really like that you brought up the sometimes you have to meet people at where they're at. Sometimes they're not ready to take the big leap, and so helping them take those first few little steps, because human nature, sometimes when you push someone to take the big leap, they're going to dig their heels in stronger and not move at all. And so I think it's really important that you brought that up, of just you can't expect everyone to be at the same spot at the same time. People are going to have varying levels of awareness and information and comfort. And that's okay, as long as they're continuing to progress and take the advice and become more self-aware and more of an ally. So I really love that you brought that up, and I think it's really important. And it's something that I think is not necessarily talked about enough, of that, sometimes it's better to get people to do the incremental growth and to try and push them to the next mile.
Yeah.
So we're kind of coming a little bit to the end of our questions, and we've got a few minutes left. But you touched on something, and I don't want to let it pass, because I think it's really important. You talked a little bit about ERGs. And I think this is somewhere where a lot of companies are flying a little blind, or they have them, but they don't know how to support them, or they have them, but they're very informal and they don't hold a lot of power. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, how would you recommend an HR team supporting ERGs and helping them attain a level of power that they can actually make some changes within the organization? And I don't mean burdening them with everything that needs to get done, because they're already burdened with a lot, but actually empowering them to have a voice in an organization to help make change.
Yeah, this is a great question, because empowering your ERG, the more you empower them, the more they'll be doing that work that you're actually measuring and trying to do, right? So so it definitely makes sense to kind of obtain a buy-in. It depends on the size of the company. Really, if it's an ERG that's informal or formal. So we've in our work we see anything from like a informal Slack channel, or a group, like an online group, email thread, stuff like that, to kind of like something more formal, to an ERG that has a budget and objectives for the year. So we've seen like a wide array, but I think it's really it's really important to kind of include them in the conversations, and to kind of really have this attitude of co-creating things if you want the ERG to be included. That way, that way that way the buy-in is easier, right? And another thing is that we've seen is obviously people are very busy, right? And then the ERG is like on top of that, and then so but one thing that is also like sometimes is a challenge, is like the transition between ERG leads or co-leads. And this is something that, to take into account when kind of planning, because sometimes like, you want to plan for like the next year, but then there's a ERG change. So you want to keep that in mind as well. So the ERG transition as well, to kind of be able to, achieve the yearly goals, and kind of, through the transition as well.
And this is a bit of a hot topic. I'm going to say it's a hot topic between executives and HR people leader and ERGs. But what do you see as sort of best practices around compensating ERGs? Because it is extra work, right? It is not like, oh, we're going to reduce your regular workload by 20% so you can pursue this. It's, oh, you're going to pursue this on top of what you're already doing. So there should be extra compensation that comes along with these things. What do you see works well? What do you see that doesn't work well? What would you recommend for, startups that have just done a bunch of layoffs and can't afford to actually put a salary increase behind something like this?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, like the current situation is tough, but it's also, some of the things that like, in other waves kind of work well is really about, just kind of figuring out how to obtain a buy-in from the person who is determining the budget, and so kind of working with having a long-term strategy regarding that, right? Because it's you can always get like really creative with ERG budgets as well. Like it can be something like, or that relates to like professional development, or that relates to something that you can use for like trainings, or attending events that ultimately kind of also work for the for kind of the overall business activity as well. So I think it's it's a problem where you can get really creative about, and really kind of start to play with what's possible, and what's a good way to achieve your goals in a very elegant way.
Oh, cool. Thank you for that. Yeah, I know it's a conversation that I hear a lot of around just like, what are people compensating their ERGs with? How do we do this? How do we, I don't have any dollars, but how can I make this happen? And so,
yeah. And
I think,
kind of to return the question to you, like, what has been your experience? Like, how do you see that?
I've seen everything from like extra vacation time. So just like if you're on an ERG, you get an extra like 2 weeks of vacation. The idea being you're taking on a little bit extra work, you need a little bit extra downtime so you're not burning out. To equity grants, so not getting cash but extra equity in the organization. To dollars, like Culture Amp just put out a nice blog post on like, this is how they compensate their ERG members and leads, and how a few other companies do. And it's like, some of them it's just an extra 10 grand on their salary for, while you're like an ERG lead, you get extra $10,000 a year. Now, not every company can do that, obviously. And then to your point of like extra L&D budget, like maybe you get an extra $1,000 a year to spend on L&D that's specific to your role as an ERG lead. So maybe initiatives around DEI, around leadership, around management, that type of stuff. So there's a lot of ways that you can do it. And I'll be honest, it's something that we're trying to figure out here at Gusto right now, of what is the best approach for how we can compensate our sort of our DEI council at this moment in time. That's still a little bit of a question mark, and I'm trying to finalize. Yeah, we're like you said, we're trying to be creative about it and figure out what we can do. And we can't really take the vacation approach because we already have unlimited vacations, so we can't really give people more.
Maybe you get some answers from this webinar.
I think so. I've got some ideas for sure. I've definitely got a couple ideas, so I appreciate that. We've got about 10 minutes left. And as we're coming up into the last 10 minutes, I really encourage anyone, if you have any questions, throw them into the chat. And if you're not comfortable asking questions and not anonymously, if you are in a Slack group with me, maybe in the people group or another one, you can DM me and I'll ask it on your behalf so that you maybe don't have to have your name attached to it if you feel like it's a silly question. But I will assure you, there's no such thing as silly questions in this context. We're all trying to learn together and grow. But as we're coming into the kind of like last 10 minutes, Sarah, I wanted to ask you, what is one or two things that, you know, every person in our audience can kind of start doing tomorrow that will help their 2S LGBTQ plus teammates and employees? Like, what's one or two things that we can all kind of just go and do and action on after this webinar?
Yeah, so thanks so much for that question. So it's really two things. So first one is kind of paying attention to amending the gender binary on forms, just to kind of, you know, from that first moment that people engage with your organization, they feel like, okay, this is a place for me as well. And then the second would be, you know, find your local organization and partner with them to work together to achieve the goals that you set out in your D&I strategy. It's really when working with organizations that you can kind of, you know, energize and kind of engage your community within your company, as well as you know, your whole company and all the allies, to kind of really, you know, not only celebrate Pride, but also go beyond that and you know, celebrate diversity all year round.
Oh, I love it. And I think like you said, that local community, it's and if you're fully remote, you can do it in any of the cities that you have employees in, and maybe start with the city that has the most representation. But it's, you know, start somewhere, engage that community, engage that organization. And I always like, the more people are exposed to other members of the community, the more empathy they'll start to have, the more consideration they'll start to have. Like, the more we interact with each other, like it's when we get into echo chambers that we start to become more and more ignorant. But the more we interact with each other, the more we see that we do have a lot of similarities with other members of different communities, the more we feel that we can have those conversations and be empathetic and compassionate and really sort of help people who are struggling, because some of us are struggling more than others.
Exactly. And yeah, it's really about, I love what you said about like echo chambers, and it made me think about like also when we're in our head, like the world looks a lot less compassionate than when we're actually in community, right? So it's really about community, and thanks so much for providing this space.
Cool. We still have a few minutes, and we just got a great question in, so let's jump into it. Do you have any advice on how to handle a situation where someone does not want to include pronouns in a company directory or email signature, specifically a cisgender person who is taking the stance that this is their private information?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So so this is an interesting situation. You know, it really depends on kind of how much like if your policy within your company is to have pronouns that, you know, for it to be an obligation or for it to be a voluntary thing. And then also it depends if it's, you know, possible to do like a one-on-one chat with this person and really kind of investigate more about like what is this really about, right? So sometimes that's not possible, especially when, you know, if the person is saying that's their private information, that's, you know, it's private, so that's, you know, that's not something to kind of inquire about. In, you know, it's a tricky situation. You know, I'm kind of in between. For example, I remember first time that I was in a circle where people would like say their pronouns. I declined to say my pronoun because I was just so overwhelmed by the fact that I'm sitting in a circle and there's all these people who are saying their name and then they're saying their pronoun next to it. And I was like, this is new, this is scary to me, and I'm having a very intense reaction to this, and I don't want to say my pronoun. So this was my personal experience, and of course, the reason I had this intense reaction is later I found out that I'm trans, and this is why I had this intense emotional reaction to it, right? So in that sense, and over time, like now I understand that my pronouns are they, them, and I'm comfortable with, saying them out loud in a professional setting and any other setting. But if, if you're saying that this is a cisgender person, or, if you're also maybe, I'm assuming you're assuming that this is cisgender person, then it's difficult and tricky because it can be a political thing. This person is against all these things and they don't want to participate in this. They have a lot of resistance about it, or they have internalized transphobia. So or it's both, and so yeah, it's a tricky situation, and that's, I think, one of the challenges in kind of requiring like obligatory pronouns in a kind of a fast fashion, right? So it's usually good to kind of either have some sort of like do that over a course of a year or 2 years, and then also kind of institute trainings where people can have at least some like safer space to kind of think through these things,
Mm-hmm.
and just ask them some questions, and then also have the opportunity for people to explain to them, okay, like, why is this important, or have the opportunity to hear, for example, a gender non-conforming or a trans person explain why is this important. Why is it important to me that everybody says the pronoun, right? So yeah, but thank you for this question. It's it's a full webinar just on this one.
It is a doozy of a one, and like you said, like, I think being really curious, like asking, like having a one-on-one with this person, and maybe letting them know at the start of the conversation, like, this is not I'm not here to convince you to do one thing or the other. I'm just here to learn more about why this is important to you. And I know I've read articles about, that, folks didn't, like yourself, that didn't want to participate in pronouns at work because they weren't ready to come out themselves, or they didn't know that they were actually, the pronouns that were assigned to them at birth were not the actual ones that they identified with. And so
Yeah.
that curiosity and giving space for people is really important. It's, I think, another reason why making people share their pronouns at work is also not always the best idea. But like you said, it's really important for the executives to do it, if they're comfortable doing it, and show that, from leadership down, this is important. And maybe that is another way to sort of show that, this is an important thing that the company is trying to do more of. Victor, you're saying we set up what is called a safe space, brave space setting for our employees. Oh, I like that. It's great. Cool. I mean, so we're at time, and I know everyone's very busy. Sarah, I know you're busy. So I want to be respectful of your time. And there's also a really great HBR article on the importance of pronouns at work. Maybe, Connor, we can include it in our email out to everyone as well. But thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This has been a great conversation. I've learned some things. I hope other people have learned some things. And if you haven't checked out Queer Tech yet, go do it. Check it out. So thanks again, everyone, and appreciate you joining us today. Thanks again, Sarah.
Thanks, Noah.
Bye, everybody.